Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Betty Chen. Well-known UK magazine The Economist has featured Taiwan on its early May issue cover. The bold headline on the cover reads, "The Taiwan Test," while the featured article is titled, "A Superpower Crunch Over Taiwan is Coming." The report discusses Taiwan's precarious position between two superpowers, the United States and China. It says Washington's stance on cross-Strait tensions is shifting significantly, prompting fears that Beijing may see an opportunity to seize Taiwan. Today, two guests join us to explore this topic. Peifen Hsieh, International Cooperation and Development Fund Deputy Secretary General, and Wang Kaijun, KMT Department of International Affairs Assistant Director. A warm welcome to both of you on the show. The Economist says U.S. President Donald Trump pushed trade protectionism in a bid to make America strong again, but by taking a hardline approach towards U.S. allies, he may have weakened Washington's ability to defend Taiwan. That could lead Beijing to believe the time is ripe to take Taiwan. So The Economist suggests Chinese leader Xi Jinping sees this as a fleeting opportunity that may push him to act on Taiwan. Based on this description, what's your take on this? Let's start with Peifen.
Sure. I wouldn't fully agree with the Economist's assumption, but if Beijing were to interpret Trump era as an opportunity for attacking Taiwan, it would reflect a significant misreading of international relations. So it's true that during the Trump administration thus far, protectionist policies and tensions with allies may have created some level of uncertainty. But any perception that the U.S. would turn inward or would abandon its allies and partners could easily lead to overconfidence in Beijing. International relations are very dynamical. It's shaped by actions and the reactions. So if China were to act aggressively based on a false sense of opportunity, it would likely provoke a strong counter-reaction. In fact, China's growing aggressiveness has already triggered greater reactions among democratic nations in recent years. For example, the AUKUS Pact, stronger Japan-U.S. ties, and increased military deployment by Western powers in this region. So all reflect a consolidated effort to deter and counter China. So Taiwan's role in this architecture has only become more central. So if Xi Jinping miscalculates the situation, it may accelerate global resistance against Beijing's aggression and ambitions.
This is, again, a very important article by The Economist. What's your take on this, Kaijun?
Well, absolutely. I personally think, the concern of The Economist comes from the fact that I think they're a little bit concerned that currently we see in the Western camp. There's a variety of trade and also security-related intense conversations happening. So I think from a diplomatic front, The Economist is mostly worried about how China is going to see, or CCP for that matter, is going to see this as a window of opportunity to perhaps permanently change a part of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait without actually meeting a lot of timely response from the rest of the world. That being said, I think The Economist should also cover other aspect, which is also going on as well, is basically that we see a lot of assurances that's also happening within this region. Not to mention, for example, the reported Pentagon paper about clearly defining that, number one, the CCP is a pacing challenge for the United States. The fact that Washington and also Manila had a very unprecedented and comprehensive military exercise very close to Taiwan, for example. And we also see in this new, this year's Hanguang military simulation, we can sometimes see a security breakthrough. We have a very famous retired American general, the son of a very famous person who we just got the main battle tanks out of his name, General Abrams, right? Came to Taiwan, not just an advisor, not just as an observer, but also as an advisor this time, playing a more proactive role. So I think The Economist's concern on the diplomatic side does have some sort of merits from their perspectives, but I would say they should also perhaps cheer people up a little bit and say, well, I mean, you also can look at what the Washington is doing in the Pacific region when it comes to solidifying deterrence against the CCP.
It's good that, Kai-jun, you talk about the important breakthrough that we can see in terms of this kind of military cooperation between Taiwan and its major partners. But in this article, The Economist also warns that Trump might choose to abandon Taiwan to avoid a nuclear conflict with China. In terms of this nuclear conflict, how likely is that scenario?
Well, I mean, given President Trump's recent comments and interviews regarding a lot of different things that might be unheard of in traditional, I would say, international diplomacy, right? Such as not excluding Greenland to take Greenland by force, but although, to be very fair, he said that scenario would be very, very unlikely. And also when, I would say, it just happened about, I think, in the last 24 hours, right? When President Trump responded to the Canadian Prime Minister in the White House as never say never about perhaps hinting on the 51st states rhetoric. So these are new norms in international diplomacy, and that will cause a lot of people to perhaps imagine scenarios that we previously see as unthinkable, right? But I wouldn't translate all these different rhetorics to be translated into actual policy implementations. So I think, the possibilities are very, very low at this point.
Fingers crossed. But going back to the new norms, there are all kinds of scenarios that have been unprecedented, but they are really happening at this critical moment in time. So, Peifen, do you think that a nuclear conflict will be the ultimate red line between the U.S. and China?
To be honest, a nuclear conflict between the U.S. and China is a very highly speculative scenario. But even if that's true, it does highlight why strengthening Taiwan and U.S. relations is very critical at this moment. So strategically, we all know that Taiwan is essential to the first island chain. Abandoning Taiwan would be equivalent to abandoning the very core of the Indo-Pacific security arrangement. So abandoning Taiwan means abandoning Japan, abandoning the Philippines, and abandoning the Western Pacific. So going back to your question, if the U.S. were to so-called abandon Taiwan and China will to take over Taiwan, the regional balance would be destroyed. And it will not just increase the risk of a nuclear war. Actually, it will make any kind of conflicts more likely. So I believe abandoning Taiwan is at least as worse as a nuclear war.
Yeah. If we're talking about the role of Taiwan, both of you must agree that Taiwan plays a critical role in the Indo-Pacific. But if Taiwan really becomes a bargaining chip in the U.S.-China competition, how will be the strategic balance being maintained in the Asia-Pacific region? How will these countries respond? Peifen?
Actually, the consequences for the U.S. will be very serious and far-reaching, strategically, diplomatically, and politically. So from a strategic point of view, Taiwan is a critical element of U.S. defense position in the Indo-Pacific, as I just mentioned. So Taiwan is a keystone of this island chain. Okinawa, Taiwan, and the northern part of Philippines is actually the same theater in war. So if Taiwan is sacrificed, the entire Indo-Pacific strategy collapses. So in addition, Taiwan's world-leading semiconductor industry is also playing a very crucial role in both the global economy and the U.S. national security. So losing access to this high-end technology or allowing it to fall under the PRC's control would have a significant consequences for innovation and defense readiness. And diplomatically, the message to U.S. allies and partners would be devastating to the U.S. as well. So countries like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines may lose confidence in the U.S. credibility. So they will likely begin seeking a more independent or China-friendly security arrangement. And China, on the other hand, would be emboldened. So U.S. giving in Taiwan would validate PRC's coercive strategies and could also lead to further demands in other regions. They will never stop at Taiwan. And also politically, the backlash will be severe as well. So public opinion in the U.S. actually tends to support Taiwan. And any move to give up Taiwan's security would spark internal outrage from across the party spectrum in the U.S. So in short, I believe treating Taiwan as a bargaining chip may, in some point of view, may gain like short-term benefits, but strategically, it will weaken America's position in this region, in the Indo-Pacific, and also diplomatically, it will also alienate the U.S. allies. And last, politically, it will divide the U.S. So actually, how the U.S. treats Taiwan will define its role as a global leader in the years to come.
Talking about the rapidly changing international situation, we understand that ever since President Trump took office, his favorite word, tariff, has been a buzzword for many countries in the world, including Taiwan. And also President Trump, before his policy of reciprocal tariffs, he already threatened that he would impose 150 to 200% of tariffs on China if China invaded Taiwan. But now we see that the U.S. has already imposed 145% of tariffs on China, and China is ready to fight back. So you can see that Washington has already played its hand, meaning that probably the U.S. no longer has a leverage of using tariff as a useful tool against China. So it's more like a game, seeing which country, the U.S. or China, can endure the pain longer. So how do you see the current U.S.-China standoff, Kai-jun?
Well, absolutely. I think that's a very critical question to ask. I would say that both sides are trying their very best to seek a way to restore, to a certain extent, a functional and also meaningful relationship and interactions. But I would say that the CCP might be a little bit more desperate due to the short-term and the immediate impact of all these trade wars and tariffs are hitting harder to the CCP's economy. But I would say, President Trump has said many times that he enjoys a good relationship with Xi Jinping. But he's also standing on his ground firmly, says there's some sort of prerequisition, some sort of preconditions that the CCP has to meet before any talks or any dialogues can happen. And I would say that perhaps the Chinese have gave their concession because, I think recent news came out that you see the Secretary of Treasury, Mr. Bennett, is going to meet with the Vice Premier of the CCP, He Lifeng, in Switzerland, I think next week. So I think they're trying to explore that possibility of a conversation. Yeah.
What's your take on this, Peifen?
Actually, the current standoffs between the U.S. and China are not limited to tariffs only. So the future of U.S.-China relations is expected to be dominated by competition and confrontation rather than cooperation. So actually, I believe it's a long-term strategic context. Right now, it's under discussion is tariffs. But while tariffs may have reached a limit, because to a certain degree, 145% is probably the same as 200% or 300%. But the U.S. still holds powerful tools such as technological leadership, financial systems, and its allies networks. So because the U.S. and China standoffs go far beyond tariffs and go far beyond Taiwan as well, I think this is happening under a more broader context.
Go back to this article. It also touches on Taiwan's domestic politics. And the article says that dysfunction in the Taiwan's internal and domestic political system is a weakness that China's gray zone tactics could exploit. So in Taiwan, we do have seen some major issues like the recalls and also even a no confidence vote. How do you see the internal divisions in Taiwan, and will that really become a weakness that China can take advantage of?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking a very important question. I think to put it gently, it is unfortunate that our society has become this polarized. And I think, of course, from my perspective, and I also dare to say from the perspective of the opposition majority supporters, that it is precisely because this current double minority government doesn't want to give, proper compromises or even show sincerities in negotiating or perhaps achieve some sort of, as the Economist has suggested, efficient power sharing. I think the internal division of Taiwan, it can be solved, but it has to come from the minority government as long as they are willing to stop this nonsense of a major recall campaign and also let us do our own jobs, right? And when it comes to CCP, for example, within the question about taking advantages on Taiwan, I say it's already happening. For the audiences that perhaps are not really following the trajectory of Taiwanese politics, we see there's very, very concerning and severe CCP espionage cases happening within this minority government. So,
Peifen, what's your take on this?
So for Beijing, buying Taiwan is cheaper than attacking Taiwan and going into war with Taiwan. So that's why Beijing, the PRC, has invested heavily in gray zone tactics and in information warfare, in disinformation, in social polarization in Taiwan. So that's something we really have to take note of. Taiwan's internal division is not only about Taiwan's internal division. This internal division allows China to explore the various channels of influence and ultimately create a favorable condition for advancing the goal of annexing Taiwan by the PRC. So Taiwan is not just standing alone as a Taiwan. It's really playing under this bigger geopolitical politics.
As mentioned by Kai-Jun, I have a follow-up question. We do see the serious espionage situation happening in the ruling government, meaning the high-ranking officials, they're surrounded by the spies sent by China. What's your take on this? What can we do to prevent this kind of infiltration from the other side of the Taiwan Strait?
Yes, yeah, that's we all know the PRC, the CCP, has been engaging in the united front work for many years. So they have like three kinds of warfare targeting at Taiwan: the psychological warfare, the public opinion warfare, and legal warfare. So this is really something. They are not just like across the Taiwan Strait. Their influence and even their agents have been penetrating the Taiwanese society and even some part of the official system of Taiwan. So this is really something we have to be really aware of, and we have to be really cautious, because it's not just a normal neighbor like across the Taiwan Strait, but it really has some political agenda behind the CCP's every movement toward Taiwan, and it has been penetrating our society.
Kai-Jun, what's your take on this? What will be the opposition's suggestion to the government to counter this kind of espionage?
I mean, number one, to stop the relentless smearing of the opposition majority as so-called disloyal oppositions of the Republic of China on Taiwan, and framing everything and everyone disagreeing with the DPP policy platform as CCP sympathizers, right? I think is breaking our democracy to a certain extent. I think when mutual tolerance of governments, parties to the opposition disappears, we start to see a decay when it comes to the people's confidence in democracy. So I think that would be the first step. Some reconciliation must happen, some compromises must happen, and then we can start sitting down, understanding that every single one of us, people who are working for the elected officials and the elected officials and executives themselves, we are all working to the betterment of the national interests of the Republic of China, Taiwan. So I think that would be a very productive starting point.
Thank you. Moving on, at the same time, the foreign policy website published an op-ed titled "Trump Should Rein in Taiwan." The piece argues that President Lai Ching-te's remarks have increased the risk of war with China and calls on Trump to rein him in and help ease cross-strait tensions. The article says that President Lai Ching-te, though he has not officially declared formal independence of Taiwan, he is engaging in the so-called salami slicing tactics, the moves that could easily cross Beijing's red line and spark a crisis. So how do you interpret this view? Peifen?
I think the accusation of salami slicing is really just an attempt to delegitimize Taiwan's normal democratic functioning. So the key issue here is not whether President Lai Ching-te has crossed Beijing's so-called red line, but rather that these so-called red lines are constantly shifting and inherently unreasonable. Beijing's definition of red lines is fluid and politically motivated. So what were once clear boundaries, such as opposition to a formal declaration of Taiwan independence, have expanded over time to include routine actions such as Taiwanese president transitioning through the United States or promoting democratic values. So these actions, widely accepted by democratic nations worldwide, are now framed by Beijing as their red lines, which cannot be crossed, are framed by Beijing as provocations. So this means that China's red lines are not grounded in international laws or mutual agreements, but are instead strategic tools used to pressure Taiwan and other countries alike. So in such a context, any action by Taiwan, no matter how moderate or how defensive they are, can be portrayed as a challenge to Beijing's authority and a challenge to its red lines. Therefore, I always believe that appeasement is not a good solution to any conflicts, and appeasement has proved time again in the history that it's failed. So the central problem lies here is not in Taiwan's behavior, but in the ever-expanding and arbitrary nature of China's red lines. So this shifting framework makes the stable cross-strait relations nearly impossible, and positioning Beijing's political agenda as the real threat to regional peace is very important. That we have to know the red lines set by Beijing is arbitrary and is ever-changing.
So we know that President Ching-te has adopted a strategy of pursuing peace through strength, and the Taiwanese government has continued to buy weapons from the United States to maintain the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. How effective is this kind of continued arms procurement from the U.S.? Do you think that this is really enough for Taiwan?
Well, maybe I'll spare about a minute to kind of slowly respond to the previous question a little bit.
Please.
You know, the author, Mr. Christopher, I'm not going to butcher his last name out of great respect for him, is a senior fellow and the director for American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace. I think he used to work in the U.S. government for a variety of capacities, right? So I do believe his view does represent some opinions among the U.S. observers to this region. While, yes, indeed, most of us can agree that the CCP does bear the majority of the responsibilities for the instability of this region, it doesn't mean that the current government is free to be viewed as, to a certain extent, a provocative actor in this case. So, you know, one of the things that I will absolutely urge, and I think the opposition majority would agree, is that we need to make sure that we understand the actual Taiwanese economic and political standing before we conduct all these unnecessarily provocative actions, right? So when it comes to this question, you know, I believe ultimately the effectiveness of the United States arms procurement to Taiwan lies on several key preconditions. Number one, do we have enough service members to operate U.S. weapons? Number two, do we have sufficient strategies or perhaps new ideas when it comes to battle orders to form sufficient deterrence capabilities, right? What is the ratio between symmetric and asymmetric capabilities? Without figuring out these two monumental challenges first, there is a certain degree of complexity when it comes to what kind of weapons we want to buy, what kind of weapons we really need, and what kind of weapons that we need to argue and convince Washington that we really need.
Moving on, I remember sometimes people saying that the problem of Taiwan's military procurement, the biggest issue that we're facing is not about whether we can buy the weapons, it's whether we can receive, meaning the delivery from the U.S. side. How do you comment on this in terms of the serious delay of the arms that Taiwan has procured from the U.S. government?
That's an excellent question. I think number one, we all understand that perhaps because of COVID and because of the sudden eruption of the war in Ukraine, and also all these subsequent international challenges happening all around the world, we understand the U.S. defense industry complex is perhaps not catching up to their own domestic demand, not to mention about their obligations to foreign allies and foreign partners. So, you know, I think Congress and also the U.S. government, I think SecDev Hexed had made I think a clear kind of like policy statement that he wants to streamline everything and trying to make the arms sales process and also the delivery process to be as simple as possible. So I hope that, you know, number one, the United States themselves can overcome these market-driven complexities. And then number two, trying to see that Taiwan, amongst all the other U.S. alliances and partners around the world, we really do need those weapons to be here on time.
Mm-hmm. The cornerstone of U.S.-Taiwan relations is based on the Taiwan Relations Act and the 6 assurances, and the past U.S. administration have also maintained that. But now President Trump is in office. Do you think that the U.S. government under President Trump will continue to fulfill its commitment in protecting Taiwan under the TRA and 6 assurances? Peifen?
The TRA is a law passed by the U.S. Congress, so I think whether the administration, the executive, likes it or not, is a law that's currently in effect. And I do believe that the support for Taiwan gains the bipartisan support from both the Democratic and the Republican. And it's hard to predict what will be happening in the future, but from what has been happened in the Trump administration in the past 3.5 months, we can see that the State Department has been pretty supportive of Taiwan, and also the U.S. permanent mission to the UN in the Security Council, they also have stressed that the misreading of the number 2758 UN resolution by the PRC. They have already called this out. So I believe that the foreign policy team of Trump is so far pretty understandable of what's going on in the Taiwan Strait, and they know Taiwan is a partner of the U.S.
Okay. Thank you very much for both of your insights. We understand that Taiwan needs to address not only our internal political polarization, but also externally. We need to be able to withstand the pressure and the threat from the world, find more partners so that we can stand firmer on the global stage. Thank you once again for your insights. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.